Well, thank you, Holly and Stacy, for the introduction. And I want to cover NRCS Biosecurity Policy and how that policy is to be implemented. And we also have Dr. Dan Grooms from Michigan State, who will focus his presentation on field visits to livestock operations with real-life experiences and wisdom for biosecurity protocol. And Rick Fasching, who is an agronomist at the WNTSC, and he will talk about crop field work as it relates to risk reduction for transporting invasive weeds, pests, and diseases. I have 18 years of experience with NRCS, and most of my career has been designing animal waste systems. I started in Kansas and moved to Washington State, where I worked primarily with dairies. And last October, I moved to Oregon to the WNTSC. And I am the first to admit that biosecurity has not been the first thing I thought about when planning a field visit. However, I think developing an awareness of the issues and becoming familiar with the process, assembling the equipment, and keeping the supplies on hand can help make biosecurity part of our field visit routine. Practicing biosecurity protocol will help establish a level of competence with our cooperators. Just like watching your doctor wash their hands when they come in the exam room, using biosecurity protocol for a field visit will help our customers know we care about the health of their operation. At times, I find having a simple acronym can help me remember things I need to do. So I made an acronym about the steps for biosecurity to help remember the basic process. APCU. A, arrive clean. Keep contact surfaces, shoes, and hands clean. Don't bring a disease to the customer's operation. P, prevent vehicle transport. Keep vehicles at a distance. Respect or assume access restrictions, as vehicles are difficult to disinfect. C, clean up after the visit. Clean and disinfect or remove manure contaminated surfaces. Don't take a disease home. U, use proper hygiene methods. Many animal production facilities are becoming more concentrated to take advantage of the benefits of economy of scale, and the concentrated livestock operations are even more susceptible to infectious diseases. This is a table that lists a number of diseases of concern in livestock and the common methods of disease transmission. Some of the diseases have multiple means of transmission, and these can spread even more easily. Some of the diseases have delayed onset of symptoms and are difficult to trace. And some of the diseases can also cross between species and are a concern to humans as well. So all of the previous diseases from the other table list ingestion as one of the methods of transport, and manure is the common medium for transmission of ingestion. The work that NRCS staff do during a farm visit take them to many parts of the farm facility. This may be required for a number of reasons: inventory and evaluation in the planning process, developing a CNMP, a site survey, waste storage facility site assessment, as well as other purposes. When moving throughout the farm, there's a high probability of being in the vicinity of animal manure. Contact with manure in itself is not a big problem. The problem comes when staff person leaves the farm, where they go next, and what goes with them inadvertently to the next farm or their own home place. So when you're working with a landowner as an NRCS representative, you are responsible for your biosecurity actions. You need to arrive clean, prevent vehicle transport of disease, clean up after your visit, and use proper hygiene methods. Along with biosecurity protocol being the responsible thing to do, it is also written in NRCS policy. It can be found in the General Manual, GM 130-403H. The General Manual policy outlines 3 levels of biosecurity to follow. Reading the General Manual is like reading a set of rules, and I apologize for the lack of a good storyline. But just to make sure everyone is aware, here goes. Section 1 states, during periods of outbreak of infectious animal diseases, NRCS employees shall not enter affected areas for normal planning and implementation purposes. Entry to those areas shall only be made in response to a request from the state veterinarian or other responsible official in order to provide guidance and assistance for mortality disposal. In those situations, biosecurity measures as directed by the responsible official shall be followed. And it continues. Section B, NRCS employees will adhere to Level 1 biosecurity measures at all times, or more stringent measures that farmers, ranchers, or owners, producers may have in place. During periods of heightened concern for infectious animal disease, additional procedures outlined in Levels 2 and 3, part of the policy, shall be implemented as recommended by APHIS, which is the USDA Office for Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, and the state veterinarian. So this policy describes 3 levels of biosecurity. Level 1, to be followed at all times. So let's look at what Level 1 refers to. Level 1 is for visits to farm or ranches that entail office or home visits only. Minimum biosecurity level to be followed at all times, even when going to the office or farm home, should require so you would avoid livestock area, pens, barns, etc., unless it is necessary to complete the goal of the visit. Park vehicles on paved or concrete areas away from production sites on farms to avoid contact with dirt, mud, or manure. Wash hands with soap and water or an antibacterial gel before entering and leaving the premises to avoid transmission of disease agents from person to person. Level 2. Level 2 is required for visits to farm or ranches where minimal contact with livestock, poultry, or their housing, such as barns, pens, or hutches, is unavoidable to attain the goal of the visit. So for the farm visit, when staff need to collect site-specific data and physical access goes beyond the office, Level 2 biosecurity should be followed. So what exactly is Level 2 biosecurity? In the policy, it states that it's a combination of both Level 1 plus some additional items. So from Level 1, park your vehicle on paved concrete area away from production site and away from contact with dirt, mud, or manure. Wash your hands with soap and water or an antibacterial gel before entering the premises. And then Level 2 begins, you put on clean rubber boots or new plastic boots upon exiting the vehicle. And after returning to the vehicle, clean and disinfect any equipment used with a brush and approved EPA disinfectant solution. And you clean the rubber boots with the approved EPA disinfectant diluted with water. Scrub the bottom of the boot with a brush to remove all dirt and debris. Dispose of disinfectant solution according to the label. Do not discard unused disinfectant on the ground. If wearing disposable overboots, place them in a plastic bag and leave it on the premises for the owner or producer to dispose, or place them in a designated dirty area of your vehicle. And then back to Level 1, wash your hands with soap and water or an antibacterial gel after leaving the premise to avoid bringing the disease home with you. So NRCS has the Level 3 policy where there will be close contact with livestock and poultry, walking through narrowly confined pens and lots where animals are within reach, and actually handling and inspecting the animals. This is not commonly associated with the farm visit tasks NRCS typically needs to do. However, in this event, you can continue on with the Level 3 policy, which has Level 1 and Level 2 plus the items listed here. And there will be a copy of all this information that is available with the general manual policy that we will be sending out. I'm not going to go over it anymore here.
Hey, Sally, if I might, there was a question that came in. I'll ask real quick. The question is, what about carrying hand sanitizer and using when moving from farm to farm?
I would say that that's definitely important. The question would be not only hand sanitizer, but your boots and anything that's going to be coming into contact with the ground and manure. And again, the hand sanitizer needs to be appropriate for the areas where you're going to be working. So everyone has a role in the responsibility for biosecurity. And as NRCS staff, when you conduct business with or visit a livestock operation, you are responsible for your own biosecurity actions. And in the policy, it states the district conservationists have responsibilities. They are responsible for ensuring that the local staff and partners follow these procedures. And also in the policy, the state conservationists have responsibilities for communicating the policy to all the offices and to all state partners and providing all NRCS offices with the required equipment, materials, and information to implement biosecurity measures and procedures. So again, most of the work NRCS does can be covered under Level 1 and Level 2 biosecurity protocols. To make the best use of time spent at the farm during each field visit, make sure you are prepared with all the supplies and equipment you need. That requires that you plan ahead for the farm visit. If travel time permits, you should make just one farm visit a day. This makes a specific farm visit more effective, and the biosecurity protocol will be just part of the routine to arrive clean, prevent vehicle transport of disease, clean up after your visit, and use proper hygiene. And the USDA Agency Animal Plant and Health Inspection Service, APHIS, has a lot of resources available to help NRCS stay current on infectious animal diseases. There will be a few links available in a handout that comes after this presentation. We've got them also presented here. It's important for the state office to know what the particular infectious diseases are, the area they need to be aware of. So, and it's also important to recognize that not all diseases are created equal. There may be needs to have a specific disinfectant used for different diseases. In each APHIS, there's a regional APHIS office that can be contacted, and also your state veterinarian can be contacted for specific state information. We have another question regarding personal responsibility for biosecurity in the event of a biosecurity incident. Can the individual's DNA be used to tie down an incident to a specific individual? Rick Fasching, who is sitting here with me, has some comments to share with that.
Yeah, more than likely, they have the technology to do that, but more than likely they're not going to do that. They're basically looking at protecting the cattle and on-site and off-site, and unless there's somebody's trying to do terroristic type activities, they're not going to go that far.
Okay. So the supplies shown here are an example of what one state has provided for each field vehicle. This equipment provides the material to both clean field boots or have disposable overboots and gloves as necessary. There's a 5-gallon container of water, detergent with a wash pan and a scrub brush, disinfectant spray, hand sanitizer, disposable overboots, and disposable gloves. And this is an example of disposable travel equipment that is very convenient to take. You've got your shoe coverings and travel hand sanitizers. And as NRCS moves toward greater field presence with our utilization of mobile computers and software developed through the Conservation Delivery Streamline Initiative, CDSI. The importance of biosecurity is going to be even more critical. You need to arrive clean, prevent vehicle transport, clean up after the visit, and use proper hygiene. To summarize, NRCS Biosecurity Policy, Basic Protocol for Farm Visits. Be prepared. States should become familiar with the diseases most likely to be encountered in your area. Identify the best disinfectant to clean the surfaces to be treated. Order supplies and equipment for staff and vehicles used for field visits. Follow up with staff to ensure they understand the proper procedures for field visit hygiene. Staff should plan farm visits by contacting the farm owner-operator ahead. Make sure that you meet their biosecurity requirements. Make each visit count by taking all the supplies needed to collect design data and farm planning information. And clean up properly after the visit to prevent bringing any diseases back with you or to the next farm. And there will be handouts available that will be sent out after this webinar with the participant list, and you can keep those for your file. Okay? I don't know if there are any additional questions, but I think now I would like to, one more question, okay, thank you. Now I would like to hand this presentation over to Dan Grooms, and Dan is currently with the faculty at the Department of Large Animal Clinical Sciences at Michigan State University. His extension and research activities have focused on the control and prevention of infectious diseases in cattle, specifically bovine viral diarrhea virus, Johne's disease, bovine respiratory disease, and bovine tuberculosis. He has also been actively involved in beef quality assurance, pre-harvest food and food safety, biosecurity, emergency preparedness, and farm security initiatives in Michigan. So,
well, Sally, thank you very much. I'll wait until I can get the presenter rights. Thank you. I think I just got them.
yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Sally. Appreciate the introduction, and greetings from East Lansing, Michigan, and Michigan State University. It certainly is a pleasure to join you here today. What I'm going to talk about very briefly is just kind of my philosophy and a little bit about how we try to train our veterinary students on getting on and off the farm, whether it's in just a routine fashion for routine farm calls or routine farm visits, or something where you may actually need to ramp up your biosecurity, such as in the case of something like a full version. So much of what I'm going to talk about is more generalistic, but you can apply the principles that I'm going to talk about in pretty much in any type of farm visit situation. So like Sally, I like to use acronyms, and so my getting on and off the farm acronym is GOOF or Goofy, and so I use this just to help our students here remember some of the protocols that we're going to talk about when it comes to getting on and off the farm. So one of the first things to keep in mind is that what are the goals of the kind of the biosecurity protocols that we follow to get on and off the farms. And most of these are intuitive. So first goal is to bring no pathogens onto the farm. So if a farm doesn't have a disease problem or it's not an issue in that operation, we certainly don't want to be the source of bringing something onto an operation. Likewise, if we are working with a farm where there is a disease problem, we certainly want to make sure that we're not bringing that pathogen off the farm and potentially serving as a vector to spread it to other farm operations. I think another important goal of getting on and off the farm is actually to reinforce the importance of biosecurity to the folks that we're working with. So in this case, the producers or farmers or farm management or even employees. So I like to use this as a teachable moment, okay? If we take it seriously and practice biosecurity, the folks that are watching us practice biosecurity, hopefully they understand that this is something important, and hopefully they start adopting biosecurity principles themselves to help protect their operation. And last but not least, I think another important thing, especially for folks that are often visiting farms, is just the producer confidence in those folks as they come onto their operation. And I'll talk about this here in a second, but I think it's incredibly important that in order for us to be able to do our jobs, whether it's as a veterinarian or a field service staff person or whatever, those producers need to be confident in us and confident that we are not potentially a threat to their operation. And biosecurity principles help to improve that confidence. So you saw this picture. This is actually the first picture that I showed you. This is actually one of the things that I've had. I had the opportunity to do was to be part of the foot and mouth disease outbreak team that helped to re-eradicate foot and mouth disease from the UK in 2001. So if you're not aware, in 2001 there was a foot and mouth disease outbreak in the UK that led to the death of close to 3 million sheep, cattle, pigs, and a variety of other animals. And as you can imagine, in that foot and mouth disease outbreak, biosecurity was an extremely important thing that had to be paid attention to. But when we look at our principles or our goals for biosecurity or getting on and off the farm, in that case, our goal, again, number one, was to make sure no pathogens, in this case foot and mouth disease, was going onto the farm, or if it happened to be a farm that had foot and mouth disease, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't coming off the farm. Secondarily, our goal was to teach the producers, in this case producers that maybe were at risk for getting foot and mouth disease, on how to keep their farm safe. And then finally, again, the other goal was to make sure that we were hopefully portraying to the producers that we were trying to do things as best we can, and so that they would have confidence when we did visit their farms. So all these goals hopefully are incorporated with proper getting on and off the farm protocols. So let's talk about, I've got 10 principles that I want to cover in fairly short order, and then at the end, if there's any questions, certainly feel free to ask them. I see there is one question where somebody is asking about assumption that biosecurity concerns are similar for poultry, aquaculture. In my view, the concerns are the same for all livestock enterprises. So it could be poultry, aquaculture, cattle, swine, you name it. Equine operations, we've had some recent herpes virus issues here in some of our equine operations here in Michigan, and biosecurity is just as important on equine operations as it is in any other operation or livestock operation. Okay, so the first principle that we always talk about is we need to think about safety first and foremost, both safety for yourself and also safety for the folks that you're going to visit. So things you got to think about, and this certainly is not an inclusive list, but where do you park? What disinfectants are you using? Because there are some disinfectants that can be that can be caustic and not so safe. So you want to make sure that the disinfectants that you're using are safe to use, or relatively safe, and if they are hazardous, which some are, you need to think about how you can use them safely. If you're going to livestock operations and you have to handle animals, you got to think about the safety of that. Any equipment that you might be using, again, think about the safety. So first and foremost, we need to think about the safety issues that may be part of any farm visit. The second principle is that we need to communicate. We have to be good communicators with the owner or the manager of the operation that we're going to visit. And when I say good communication, that's not when you show up on the farm. That's actually ahead of time. Okay. So you need to talk about them about when you're going to visit, why you're visiting, what you'll need to do when you're there. So what you need to see, or what you need to do, or what you need to sample. You need to communicate about where you need to park, and we'll talk about this here in a second, and Sally's already addressed that a little bit about proper parking procedures. And then most importantly, I think you need to communicate about specific biosecurity protocols or visitor policies that individual farms might have. Some farms, and certainly here in Michigan, some of our farm operations are becoming very sophisticated with policies or protocols that they want all visitors or maybe high-risk visitors to follow when they enter their operation. So figuring out what those protocols are or what those policies are ahead of time helps to prevent any problems when you actually arrive on the farm. So here's just an example. I mean, this is a protocol for this specific farm where they ask that, this is one specific protocol on this farm, where they ask that if somebody has visited a foreign country in the past 2 weeks, they ask that they, number one, that they don't come on the farm, and that they contact, in this case probably farm management ahead of time before coming on the operation. And the reason for this is they're trying to protect against specifically foreign animal diseases that might be attached to folks that have made visits to foreign countries. Which brings up one thing that I wanted to mention, and this might be important, especially in today's world where people do a lot of traveling. Probably the big disease that almost all livestock operators, especially cattle, pig, and sheep operators, are concerned about is a disease called foot and mouth disease. This is a disease we've not had here in the United States since the early 1900s, and certainly a disease we do not want. USDA recommends that if you have visited a country with foot and mouth disease, they recommend that you not visit livestock operations once you return to the United States for a minimum of 5 days. And the reason for that is that even though you take all precautions to clean your shoes, clean your boots, wash your clothes, so forth and so on, there is a small risk that you can actually still carry foot and mouth disease on your body or on your person and serve as a source of transmission to susceptible livestock populations. So just a word of caution in today's world where we travel a lot, if you happen to go to a foot and mouth disease country, you should not be visiting livestock operations when you return to the United States for a minimum of 5 days. That's kind of USDA's policy, and I think it's a great policy just to take on. How do you find out which countries have foot and mouth disease or other foreign animal disease? There's a website you can go to. It's just type in www.oie.oie.int. That's basically the World Health Organization for Animals. And at that site, you can find all different types of infectious diseases, foreign animal diseases, and what countries those diseases reside in. So next principle is preparation. And again, Sally's did a good job of talking about the supplies or the things that you need to have when you arrive on a farm to help make yourself biosecure, okay? So these items are going to include disinfectants, boots, whether disposable plastic boots or rubber boots that can be clean, buckets, brushes, trash bags to put maybe dirty coveralls in or dirty boots. All these supplies need to be something that you think about and prepare for before you actually arrive on the operation. Principle 4 is where to park on arrival. Okay, and again, Sally's talked about this, but this is important to think about ahead of time. So this is part of the planning process. This is part of the communication process, okay? So you should park in designated visiting park or parking areas if they exist. Now, in some cases, they don't exist. So what you should think about is where can I park where I'm away from biologically sensitive areas. So basically, in the case of livestock operations, where am I physically separated from where livestock may be housed or where they may be moving, okay? You also should be at a place where you know that you're not going to have to go back into your vehicle and move the vehicle at some later point during your visit. So you don't want to park in a driveway where tractors or other implements may be moving on and off, and all of a sudden the producer's asking you to get back in your vehicle and move your car to another location. Obviously, that creates some issues and potential biosecurity concerns, so make sure you're parked in an area where you're not going to have to move your vehicle at the point until you leave. And then finally, I think the last thing you need to think about is where can I park that will facilitate easy cleanup when I leave, okay? So as Sally mentioned, somewhere on a paved area or concrete pad or a well-graveled area where there's good drainage, you want to avoid places where there's lots of organic material, where no matter how hard you clean, it's difficult to get rid of all the organic material off of your boots or clothes or whatever else, right? So here's a picture of our feedlot at Michigan State University. It's just an aerial view, I'm just going to show you basically where our designated parking area is. This is where all visitors are asked to park. And what it does is it's separate from the animal housing units. All the white roofed buildings are the animal housing units, so it's relatively separate from those units. It's separate from all the traffic flow as far as feeding and manure handling, because most of that occurs in at the top of the slide where all the feed handling areas are. There's easy access to water here, so that if you need to fill up buckets for disinfectant or to remove organic material, then that can be done. And obviously, in this case, it's a paved parking area, so it really lends itself to easily getting cleaned up and disinfected before leaving the operation. Principle number 5 is something I think you should always consider, that when you enter an operation that there are bad bugs there on the ground and premises and that you will become contaminated, okay? So what I tell all of our students is consider all premises contaminated. There is no pristine premise. There is no pristine dairy farm. There is no pristine operation out there. And they all have bugs. They all have bacteria. They all have viruses. They all have pathogens that potentially can be carried off the operation. So the principle here is basically just think that when you enter an operation, you will become contaminated with something that potentially can leave that operation and be transported to another operation. Principle number 6 is minimize contamination on the farm. So what I'm talking about here is, as much as possible, you need to minimize contamination of yourself with areas where pathogens may be building up. So avoid areas with organic debris fields. In reality, on most operations, that's where the heaviest load of pathogens are going to reside. So it's where there's lots of fecal material, lots of other organic debris. That's where the pathogens are going to build up, and that's where they're going to live. So if you can avoid those, if your job allows you to avoid those areas, then you should. You should also avoid handling biologically sensitive items if possible. In the case of livestock operations, that's the animals. Because again, in most cases, they're the ones that are harboring the bad bugs, okay? So an example of this is a feedlot, and this happens to be the sick pen of this feedlot, and all these cattle that are in here are at this point affected with bovine respiratory disease. So they probably have some virus or bacterial infection that they are shedding, and potentially a source of spread to other animals on the operation, or worse, or even worse, spread to another farm. So unless we have to handle these animals, or unless we have to be with these animals, we should avoid them as much as possible. Principle number 7 is everything going onto the farm, as we mentioned earlier, it has the potential to become contaminated, and so anything coming off needs to be protected or disinfected. So if you're going on to operation, you need to keep in mind that your boots are going to become contaminated, potentially your clothes are contaminated, any equipment you take on the operation has the potential to become contaminated, and so you should treat it as being contaminated when you come off the operation. I remember when we went to the UK and did our foot and mouth disease exercises, basically everything that went on the farm had to be dunked and disinfected before it came off the operation. So this included clipboards, it included cell phones. We actually kept cell phones in plastic bags. You can actually talk through cell phones or through plastic bags on cell phones, so they had to be dunked in disinfectant. The assumption was everything that went on in the operation became contaminated with FMD virus, and bringing it off the operation, it had to be disinfected. Principle number 8 then is proper cleaning and disinfection. And I hope you all realize that there is a right way to clean and disinfect items, and there's a wrong way. And this is the short version, okay? Certainly there's more detail to this, but I think in the time that we have today, what you need to keep in mind is basically these 3 steps to proper cleaning and disinfection. The first and probably the most important step is removing organic material. Okay, so it's getting rid of the dirt, it's getting rid of the fecal material, it's getting rid of basically any organic material that may be on your boots or your coveralls or anything that you're going to clean and disinfect. Step 2 is then to clean it with detergent or soap and water. And then the final step is actually the sanitation or disinfection step. That's when you actually apply the disinfectant, which then kills or inactivates any residual viruses, bacteria, or other pathogens. Okay? Most disinfectants, in fact, the majority of disinfectants do not work at all or have limited activity in the face of organic material. So don't expect disinfectants to disinfect manure or fecal material. They just don't do it. You have to get rid of that organic material and then disinfect the surfaces that you're concerned about. Principle number 9 is proper use of disinfectants then. The first thing I will tell you is, and we talk about this with disinfectants, we talk about it with antibiotics, we talk about it with vaccines. You need to read the labels on items to understand how they work properly. All disinfectants, all vaccines, all antibiotics were designed to be used in a specific way, and the labels will give you that information as to how they should be used. And I would follow those labeled recommendations as close as you can to make sure that disinfectant has as good a chance as possible to do what it's supposed to do. So, proper use of disinfectant. First of all, you need to match the disinfectants to the pathogens. Not all disinfectants disinfect or inactivate all pathogens. So you need to pay attention to what are the pathogens of concern and make sure that you're using a disinfectant that will inactivate those pathogens. And I'll get to that here in 1 second. Proper mixing, so the dilution. Again, some disinfectants work best at specific dilutions. Okay, as an example, iodine, which is a common disinfectant that's used, in its concentrated form is not very active. It doesn't become active or a good disinfectant until it's actually diluted. All right, concentrated iodine is not a good disinfectant. Diluted iodine is a good disinfectant. You also have to pay attention to contact time. So just splashing disinfectant on a pair of boots and then rinsing off is probably not adequate. There needs to be adequate contact time of that disinfectant with the surface that you're interested in disinfecting. And then finally, you need to be aware of specific things that may be present in the environment that may inactivate disinfectants. Again, all this information is on the label of the disinfectant that you are using. So here's an example, Novosan. This is a fairly common disinfectant that's used in a lot of different settings. The label says that it's best used at a 1% concentration. So you get it in a concentrated form. You need to then dilute it down to about a 1% concentration for it to act or give it the best chance of being effective. It also says on the label that it should be in contact with the surface for 10 minutes to be effective, okay? It also has a very limited pH range where it's effective, basically a pH between 5 and 7. So if we're outside for a very acidic environment or very basic environment, Novosan won't work. So this could be a problem in some cases with water that you might get on farms where they're either acidic or very basic. And then finally, in the case of Novosan, it has a fairly limited pathogen range that it's effective against. And so here's a chart. I hope you can read it, but here's a chart of different disinfectants, which are at the top of this chart. And then on the left side, what you'll see is a variety of different types of pathogens. And what you will see, that showed up very dark. I'm very sorry. Well, I don't know if I can back up or not. Let me see if I can do this. Sorry about this. Yep, I can. So what I want you to do is just look at the column that says biguanides, which is Novosan, and what you'll see is that this disinfectant is very effective when we're trying to disinfect against mycoplasmas or gram-positive bacteria or even gram-negative bacteria. But if you go down the line to where it says non-envelope viruses, or actually even further down, to where it says picornoviruses, that's foot and mouth disease, and it's not effective at all against foot and mouth disease, as well as some other types of bacteria such as acid fast bacteria, which in our state would be bovine tuberculosis. So this would not be a good disinfectant to be using if we had an FMB outbreak, or in the case of Michigan, it would be something we're not going to be using because of the issues with bovine tuberculosis that we have in our state. So I'm just going to skip on through here. By the way, I have provided, and I think you will be getting access to a couple PDFs looking at the various properties of disinfectants, what they're effective against, things that can actually be problematic with them. These are publications that are put out by the Center for Food Security and Public Health at Iowa State. I put the website up here, or if you can just Google Center for Food Security and Public Health Iowa State, you'll get to this website. It's a great resource for material having to do with biosecurity. Last principle is keep your vehicle clean and disinfectant, okay? What we're trying to do, number one, is not to make them a pathogen source, okay? So frequent cleaning inside and out. And then finally, I think clean vehicles are a perception thing. If we come in with a dirty vehicle, whether it's inside or outside, that comes back to the confidence issue that we were talking about earlier. Perception can go a long ways towards the confidence of producers towards. So I'm going to end right there. I hope we're not too far behind. And there was a couple questions. I don't know, do we want to handle these at the end, or do we want to handle these right now? Holly?
This is Sally.
Yep.
And if you have the questions there, if you want to just quickly go ahead and...
Yeah, so the one was about, I would assume that biosecurity is even more of a concern on organic livestock operations. I don't think we should be differentiating between organic versus non-organic farms. I think biosecurity is important for all livestock operations. The issue with organic farms isn't really so much with pathogens as it is with chemicals such as antibiotics or other things. Bottom line, though, is that biosecurity should be practiced no matter what type of livestock operation it is. And then the other question was, is there any concern about cleaning vehicle tires when moving from livestock operations to livestock operations? And the answer is there certainly is a possibility that pathogens can be spread on vehicles as they go from one operation to another. It's probably less of a risk than other potential ways, but it's something we need to keep in mind. I know in the case of foot and mouth disease, they've actually demonstrated where the virus can survive on vehicles and on tires for a length of time. And so actually during the foot and mouth disease outbreak in the UK, we were required when we left the farm to actually disinfect our tires and very often go through car washes to try to clean the vehicles as much as possible. So the answer is yes, it's low risk. It's going to be pathogen dependent, but I think it should be just part of our routine kind of culture to make sure our vehicles are clean very often. Can you give us the website for basically it should be www. This is for the World Health Organization for animals. It's www.oie.int, right? And so www.oie.int. Okay. So I think now I'm going to hand the presenter rights. You're quite welcome. Presenter rights back over to Sally.
Thank you, Dan. Okay. We'll get here to Rick's presentation.
You set to go?
Okay, set to go. Rick,
right.
Agronomist.
So I'm one of the regional agronomists at the WNTSC in Portland, Oregon, and spent most of my career around livestock operations. And the last time I was in Montana, I'm going to give you a couple of examples about what goes on, and I'm primarily going to be talking about what your responsibilities should be when we're talking about visiting off the farm, more like cropland, forage land, and so on. I did like the very fashionable disposalware that Sally and Dan were showing. It's going to be a whole new era in NRCS. And by the way, proper hygiene, when she was mentioning that, doesn't mean the deodorant that somebody wasn't using in their pickup in their field. So just keep that in mind, and we'll get through this little brunt here. All right. So as everybody knows, one of the best things, or one of our favorite things to do is go into the field, and we often assist producers and travel to not only their farmsteads, but from crop field to crop field. We go to forage acres, forest land, rangeland, and even the wildlife lands. So we tread upon the ground, and we use our tools, and we drive on the land, etc. So that means that every time we travel to a producer's farmstead or their fields, or from one field to another, from producer to producer and so on, there is real potential for spreading pests and diseases. And fortunately, for all of us, most of the fields that we go to probably don't have a pest or disease issue, and I call them protected, and so the chances of introducing a contaminant is probably minimal. However, we all need to realize that and be aware of the risks, and we need to work to prevent accidental introductions because they do happen. Utilizing some of the common sense safety measures that I'm going to talk about here in brief will ensure that the pests and diseases are not going to be spread, or that it won't be very likely. All right, so this slide shows you a few pictures of where diseases themselves might have infected sites. We all need to be aware of the potential for contamination. So when you visit a producer, you oftentimes drive into a farmstead or meet them in the field, and as you heard in Sally and Dan's presentations, pests and diseases are very easily transmitted by vehicular travel and through human activities. So in the slide you can see that people are planting herbaceous sprigs or plants, and if some of those plants are already infected, they're spreading it to the field. And if you've got water and equipment that's infected through irrigation systems, just by irrigating, you could be spreading it on a very large amount of acreage, and you would quickly contaminate an entire field where maybe it was isolated in a smaller area before. Okay, so these are some of the pictures in the slide to show some of the possibilities where diseases can preside. So moving plants, to plant products, soil, and even equipment from one area to another, whether purposely or accidentally, can introduce or spread diseases and pests. So to prevent this from happening, and although there is no specific policy, and I'm going to say that again, there's no specific policy that NRCS has when it comes to non-farmstead operation type or activities, the following approaches should be implemented or practiced on it every time you go to the field. All right. So the first thing you should really do is ask the producer before arriving at his farmstead or the field as to whether there are any pests or diseases or issues that he may know of, quarantine restrictions, or other concerns that may even be pertinent to traveling in and around the fields and the farmsteads. So Ted Turner owns a really huge ranch in Montana, and he raises buffalo, as an example. And there was a soil-borne disease that occurred on his place that killed within a week's time between 100 and 200 buffalo. And that whole place was quarantined. You couldn't even get onto his ranch. And I can't remember what the disease is called now because it went out of my head. But that was in the late 1990s, so things happen. All right, so they quarantined that, and they bleached the soil. They spread bleach all over it to try to get rid of this soil-borne disease, and you were locked out. All right, so that's why you need to call a producer ahead of time, because you might inadvertently go into a quarantine area without even knowing it. Okay, hopefully that doesn't happen. Park vehicles in a road approach or other isolated area out of the field. All right, if you're going to park on the field, you may have already contaminated your vehicle. So call the producer, park in an area that's isolated out of the field, clean your shoes before moving to adjacent fields. Okay, adhere to the quarantine restrictions, and then clean your tools in the field where you've used them. Soil augers, shovels, soil mapping equipment, they should be done in the field. Don't clean them after you've taken them off the field, because that's another potential for spreading them. Leave the disease in the field if there's already a disease there, I guess is the rule. Remove the weed seeds from your clothes. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. And then wash four-wheelers and vehicles regularly. You know, we all get into vehicles that the engineers take, and I'm picking on Sally here. Engineers always leave their vehicles dirty, and you know, the potential for spreading diseases and all that kind of stuff are really enhanced. You know, agronomists never do that. But no, seriously, you should take your vehicle in before going to the field and have it washed, and after. Both of those. So our budget's going to now be increased by vehicular washing. All right. You really need to know your crop diseases for your local area. Familiarize yourself with those that have potential. Know whether they've existed recently in your area. And so the example I'm going to give you is, I just call it Ralstonia. This is probably one of the most lethal diseases that we could get if that was allowed to spread. It affects all of these crops: tomatoes, geraniums, tobacco, bananas, and a variety of other crops. And this thing spreads so fast. It's one of these bacteriums, or one of the diseases that they're really afraid could be spread by terrorist activities. If this gets into your field, it's really tough to get rid of. So if you've ever been in California, or you've ever been in Hawaii, you know, you have to have your bag scanned by USDA APHIS folks for whether you've taken plants into Hawaii or out of Hawaii. This is one of the reasons why. Okay, so this is really easy to spread. We don't want to cause destruction, and you don't want to be the cause of that. Right, here's another one. It's called sudden oak death. Now, this is found in several states in the West already. So the pictures that you have here are from California and Oregon, and it affects predominantly oak trees, but it gets to other trees and shrubs also. So sudden oak death is a tree disease caused by plant pathogen Phytophthora, and the disease kills oak species and has devastating effects on the forest in California and Oregon and other places. It hasn't spread yet to other places that I know of, but if you can imagine where the hardwood forests are in the Midwest, Minnesota, Michigan, those types of states where there's a lot of those, this would completely devastate the oak population in those states if it was allowed to spread. So you need to be aware of this. It can also easily spread to nursery stock. So I know that people like to go into the forest sometimes and they take out little plantings of oaks and pine and things like that and plant them in their yard. If you were to do that and this disease was on that tree, it would probably kill all the neighboring trees within a couple of years. Okay, so it's not anything to play with. It can cause major devastation. All right, let's talk about weeds. So this is probably what you get into most. Preventing the spread of weeds is really hard. Of course, you all know that weeds have physical characteristics that allow them to spread along with their reproductive parts and be transmitted over long distances. I mean, they've adapted to this world. They're light, they float, they hitch rides on our clothing, the shoes, vehicles, and they can be dislodged and float on the water very, very long distances. So you don't want to be, you need to be aware of how that is done. And if you're like me when you're a kid and you get into a field that has a bunch of dandelions in it, you love to run through the field and make all the weed seeds spread all over the place. Yeah. We don't want to do that when you're in NRCS. You want to stay out of those fields. Stick to the designated roads and paths and avoid weed-infested areas. Yeah, I see we have a question. I'm going to go on with this, and then we'll get to the questions here a little bit. Right, so there's ways to prevent weed spread, and this is one of the most difficult things to do because weeds find a niche and a crack somewhere that you can't find it, like on your vehicle. So you need to clean your equipment, your boots, your vehicles, and your trailers when leaving known weed-infested areas, or you pretty much should do it every time you go to a field, coming out of the field, and back at home. You pay special attention to the undercarriage of the vehicle. The best way to wash a vehicle if you don't have access to a car wash. And you know, the typical car wash nowadays, if it's a new one, has to have a water filter system where all of their water drains into this filter system. If you don't have one of those available to yourself, the best place to wash a vehicle is actually on a lawn, so that all of these seeds and organic materials get trapped without running down the street and into the storm sewer or the stormwater treatment plant and get spread out all over the place downstream. Okay, so that's where the detergents and the wastewater can run off of without causing damage. But then don't do that on my yard because I don't want weeds. Right, and then if you note the four-wheeler in this picture, this is actually an NRCS training situation that they were supposed to have proper operator training. So, all right, next slide is ways to prevent weed spread. Like we said before, contact the landowner before entering their property and check that they what their requirements are actually for having the prevention of weed seeds, because some of them have specific instructions. You can park here, but you can't drive your vehicle out into the field. You know, something like that. So make sure you do that when you're calling them to make an appointment. And then again, clean your vehicles before you're going out there. And then here's another way to prevent weed seeds. And some of these common sense, other ones you'll be surprised at, I suppose. Stick to designated roads and avoid weed-infested areas. Clean all your clothing, shoes, and gear. Use weed, okay, this is interesting. Use weed-free feed, say that 5 times, for your horse 8 days minimum before entering rangeland and fields. So in Montana, because land resource is so huge, people get invited to visit farmers using their horses on their rangeland. If you're doing that, you have to feed weed-free hay or grain 8 days before you go out there. Otherwise, you know, when they defecate, you might be spreading weeds, believe it or not. Just the same as in the national forest. Okay, here's another one. You should be able to identify weeds, because if you can't and you start picking plants because you think they're pretty, or, oh, this is interesting, you throw it in the pickup, it blows out of the pickup, or for whatever reason, you're spreading diseases, and you don't even know that you are. Also, here's another example. In Montana, when we were picking noxious weeds next to the river areas because you couldn't spray them, some of the people were pulling knapweed, and they would, I think it was knapweed, and they would scar their hands and cut their hands, and they were actually reportedly getting huge blisters on their hands that would not go away for months at a time. So here's another reason to protect yourself. All right, so with that, those are just some common sense areas to think about. And so tell me, people, this is an issue that might come up if you were in the boondocks somewhere where you didn't have access to a car wash, like maybe even Alaska. What do you do when you're visiting producers? They raise potatoes in Alaska, so they have potential for weed diseases. Crop diseases, the same as anywhere else. And you just need to be very cognizant of the fact that you need to clean your vehicle instead of transmitting those potential diseases from one field to the other. So it doesn't matter where you're at, the possibilities are still there. With that, I'm going to end. If there's any questions, I will try to answer them. By the way, in the West, Giulio Ferruzzi is the pest management expert, and the IPM standard has changed a little bit. You know, it's not really IPM anymore. Now it's like pest mitigation. So if you ever have any issues with weeds and diseases in the West, you should call him.
He's sitting in the room with us. So I think we're ready to pass the speaker back to the moderator. Stacy?
Thanks, I got it. Did you want to have any verbal Q&A, Holly?
Sure. If you've got questions out there, please chime in.
Can I make, this is Dan Grooms, can I make a quick comment while you're waiting? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely, Dan.
Sorry. The question early on about hand sanitizers, I think, is a good question, and it leads into another thing that's important when it comes to biosecurity. I don't think hand sanitizers are that incredibly important when it comes to protecting transfer of pathogens from one livestock operation to another, but what they are important for is zoonotic disease transmission. So bad bugs from farms to yourself or well, to yourself. And so that's really where that becomes important, so that we're protecting our own health as we lead operations. That was it.
Okay, great. And just to remind our participants, if you'd like to ask your question verbally, you may do so now. If you're connected by phone, dial *1, and you'll be notified when your line has been unmuted, so you can ask your question. You can also use the raise hand icon located on the top toolbar, or to enter the question queue. And if while you're waiting in the question queue, your question has been answered, you can just click that raise hand button again or select *1 again. Okay, it looks like we have a question on the notes.
Who's pushing the buttons? So we have a question here, and we're chuckling at this one. So here's what the question is. It's grazing farmers and soil conservationists, when they go to the field for people that have livestock, in some cases the range conservationists and so on will examine, pick up, collect manure in the pastures, and then kick the manure around for a variety of interesting reasons. And I'm just verbatim saying this off of the question. So he wants to know what guidance and other sanitation is there available for soil cons to follow for grazing planning. It does make a note that the dandelions are high-protein forage and an early food source for bees in some systems, and that is absolutely true. Other producers don't want to see dandelions and such in their field if they're raising high-quality or pure stands of alfalfa, so it just depends on what you're doing. But if I was a conservationist, I wouldn't be kicking manure around, especially if they're wet cow pies. But you really need to be cognizant about how you're handling the manure, just like in all the situations. If you're collecting it, it should go into plastic bags. When you toss it, it should be into an appropriate disposal system, not out on the side of the field somewhere or out in the ditch. You just have to be very aware of what you're doing and how you're handling. The sanitation part of it, I guess I'm not understanding quite what you're saying there. But if you drive onto manures with tires, you have to follow the same protocol that Sally and Dan were talking about when it comes to farmsteads as you do when you're in the field. So if there's diseases in the manures and you're spreading them around and you're in the fields, the possibility of spreading that's very real.
And I think one of the things that this whole process for me has brought up is an awareness of the issue. And as an agency, I think it's something that needs to probably come to the forefront, that we have not been aware of biosecurity when we're on farm sites. So awareness is the first issue, and then learning about the issues and the proper protocol, and it will mean probably a change in the way we do business. But I think a change for the better for us as well as our cooperators.
So another question is, it sounds like animals in confinement emphasizes the need for biosecurity. Free-ranging animals might help reduce the need for extensive biosecurity measures. What do you think about confinement, free-ranging, and biosecurity? That depends on the system. Free-ranging might very well be a little bit better than total confinement, because anytime you put animals in a confined system, the potential for harm to quickly spread is very real versus grazing animals. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily free-ranging is much better. So, for example, my grandparents had their whole herd of hogs destroyed one year, and they never raised them again. In fact, he was so mad he burnt down the hog barn too, because that was one of the diseases. That was one of the things that you had to do, is you had to destroy the animals. They were free-range hogs, and they brought the diseases into the farmstead. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean you're exempt, or the problems are lessened by having ranged animals. Okay, so the same issues still occur. They might be a little bit less, but you still need to be cognizant of the whole thing.
If I can jump in here.
Feel free.
Yeah, this is Dan Grooms. I think the risk is with confinement is you have a larger risk of a concentration of pathogens. So so when you go into these concentrated animal units, there's a larger risk that there might be a pathogen there. But the point is, and Rick was doing a good job of saying this, it doesn't matter what type of operation you go into. If a disease is introduced onto that operation, there's a high risk that it's going to spread. And all you need to do is look at the foot and mouth disease outbreak in the UK in 2001, and the majority of those operations that actually were infected with foot and mouth disease were grazing operations, whether they're grazing dairies or grazing sheep herds or whatever. It didn't really matter. I mean, foot and mouth disease doesn't care if you're a concentrated unit or if you're a grazing unit. It will spread. And so, to me, I don't differentiate between the two because they're equally as important.
Here's a question for you, Dan. Somebody asks, there's lots of questions. If you visit a farm, come in contact with a disease, whether it's through manure or anything else, and it gets on your boots, how long, or is there a website that tells you how long can that disease survive?
So it's very much pathogen dependent. There are some pathogens like some of our viruses that don't survive for more than probably an hour, if that long, outside the animal, where some of our infectious diseases like mycobacteriums, which cause Johne's disease and bovine tuberculosis, we know under the right conditions those things can survive for weeks, months, and maybe even years, okay? So I think you need to just make the assumption that that we need to clean up anything that comes off of the operations with the assumption that they're going to survive for long periods of time, because you never know what you might be carrying off, especially from some of our livestock operations. So again, it's going to be pathogen dependent, and just make the assumption that something's there and take the proper precautions to disinfect stuff as they come off, as you come off the operations.
Thanks, Dan. And I see that our moderator says that there are callers on the line. This is kind of like a radio talk show host. What's your question?
Mr. Boza, do you have a question? Mr. Bozar? Okay. I think maybe his question was answered in the interim.
Are there any others on the line?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. I think Holly has, do you have any other information you want to cover, Holly?
Yeah, well, I noticed that the instruction document came up a minute ago, but Stacy, if you would go ahead and launch the CCA sign-in sheet. Again, if you logged into this webinar using the installed participant application, Acrobat should be opening up right now with your sign-in sheet. If you'll complete this is a fillable form, so just complete your name and your CCA number, and you'll be able to save the file with your last name and the file name and email that back to me. Some people have reported a problem with saving. If you look at that window right now, the actual save icon is grayed out, but if you go to the file menu, you can go File, Save As, and you can save that file directly to your computer, and then you can email it to me. So please take care of that. Send it in to me within 2 days, and we'll complete that certification process for you. And other than that, that's all I have today, but we had great attendance, had over 200 people at one time. And we look forward to you joining us next time, and we certainly appreciate the effort that the speakers put into their presentations today. So that's all from me, Sally, unless you have something else that you'd like to say.
I appreciate all your assistance, Holly. This has been great, and I hope that we'll have some more biosecurity policies in action.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.